Thank you for joining us today for this business hour. Today's topic is traps for the unwary, IRS audits and investigations. My name is Richard Blake. I'm the co-chair of our Government Compliance, Investigations, and White Collar Defense Practice. Joining me on the panel today is my colleague to my right, David Call. He's the vice chair of our Tax and Benefits Department. And we're fortunate to be featuring two highly knowledgeable and distinguished guests with us to my left. Todd Weitzel is a supervisory special agent for criminal investigations with the Internal Revenue Service here in Cleveland. And Perry Mastrocola, who recently left the Internal Revenue Service, where he also served as a supervisory special agent for criminal investigations. Both are in management, and Perry's in private practice, and Todd continues to do the work of the IRS with a smile on his face. We will be happy to answer questions from the audience during the program. And for those of you here in the Cleveland audience, you can simply write your question on one of the cards that you were given and just hold it up, and someone from our staff will bring it up to the table for us. For our participants outside of the Cleveland area, you are watching our live webcast from our new McDonald Hopkins website. Now, you are welcome to submit your questions by clicking on the green chat icon on the right side of your monitor or mobile device. If you submitted questions in advance of the program today, we plan to cover those questions during our discussion. We'll start to get into it. I'd like to direct my first question to Dave Call. Sort of in a general sense, what do you see in your practice? Maybe you can describe your practice to everyone and what you generally see as being flags of your clients drawing the attention of the IRS.
Thanks, Richard. Well, first of all, I was going to start off by saying we've turned over your names and company names to the IRS, but I didn't think that would be good because you would be very upset with us. But we needed some more work, but anyway, we didn't do that. But anyway, so my practice focuses a lot on tax controversy work at both the federal and the state level. And what I do is I focus on the civil side of things. I don't handle criminal, and I know Richard and Perry and Todd are going to talk more about the criminal side of things. So I'm the good cop. I try to make everybody happy and try to get through the process, because if you ever go through an IRS audit, one of the problems is it's a lot of people think that it's a mystery. They don't know what to expect and don't know what they're going to have to go through in connection with an IRS audit. A lot of people will sit there, and the first time they get a letter from the IRS, what do? Well, they simply take that letter and they go like this. They go, oh, I got a letter from the IRS. Okay, well, we'll just put that one away, and they'll throw it away. So that's the wrong thing to do. What I have found in my practice is that if you're open and willing to have good conversations with the IRS, that you can hopefully come to a good resolution of what's going on. Don't hide things. Don't try to play games with the IRS. They're doing their job, and we're trying to do our job. Now, if there's bad things that happen, they'll talk about that later when we get into the criminal side. But in general, a lot of it's a fact-finding mission that is happening at the civil side. So what I thought we'd do, if it's all right with Richard, is I want to kind of walk through the process. Because when you think about an audit, what goes on in connection when you get that letter from the IRS? And really, there's three phases of the civil side that you go through. The first is you get the letter and you're going to have an audit, okay? And so what happens at the audit level is you basically just are required to produce a lot of documentation, answer a lot of questions, and then go through the process. If you don't agree with what's happened at the audit level, you simply can appeal it, and you go to the appeals division, which is part of the IRS, but a separate group within the IRS. And if you still don't like the result that you get at appeal, you can always take it to the U.S. Tax Court. So I'm not going to get into all the ramifications associated with each process, but I thought it would be good just to outline that as what are the basics? Where do I go? What do I handle? So if we kind of go back to the audit, like I said, the first thing you'll do is you'll get a letter from the IRS. And typically, if you get a phone call from the IRS, I think we'll try to talk about this a little bit later, don't answer it. Ignore it, because usually the IRS does not call you unless it's a collection matter, which Perry can talk about later. But generally at the audit level, usually the first communication will be through a receipt of a letter from the IRS saying, hey, it's your lucky day, you've been chosen to be audited. And oh, by the way, produce all this information. So that's kind of at the first level. I don't know how much more in depth you want me to go with that, or
What was, I mean, aside from a random choosing of somebody, what are some of the issues that you find in your practice that some of the clients have done to draw the government's attention?
well, I won't mention any names. That would be really bad. But
Yeah.
you know, there's been circumstances where if you really want to be audited by the IRS and just want to roll the dice, change the front page of the 1120 or 1040. And what I mean by that is, if you don't like the descriptions of what the IRS has put on that form, just scratch them out and write in your own descriptions.
You've seen that?
Oh yeah, if you do that, you will be audited because the IRS doesn't like their forms being changed. The second thing is you just got to look at, in general, the matrix regarding how you're filling out your return. You will be flagged if there's anything that's really kind of out of the norm. And I know that there's systems out there, like if you go on TurboTax or things like that and you prepare your own returns, they give you the audit risk. I always love this. It's the little box when you're about to file your return on TurboTax, and it says, what are your audit risks? And all they're doing is putting together kind of how you filled out your return. So if you're a sole proprietorship, your odds of getting audited are probably higher. If you're running through significant capital gains or capital losses, your odds are going to be higher to get audited. Because at the end of the day, the IRS runs analyticals on the tax return. And they have programs that say, okay, if you fall within these norms, yeah, it's probably a normal return. If you're outside these norms, look out, and you may be picked for audit. It's just a luck of how the computer system pulls you, but you've got to watch out for what you're reporting on your return. As my mom told me, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. So first of all, don't misrepresent information on your tax return. Okay, that's the easy answer. But more importantly, if you do that, understand that your risks of audit are going to go up, and depending on what you do, your odds of being referred from civil to criminal will probably go up as well. So you always have to think about that when you're preparing your return.
Are there any issues if you're doing it and everything right? For instance, like if you have foreign bank accounts, is that something that would flag you more?
Yeah, right now the IRS is going very hot and heavy on foreign bank accounts. You've probably seen in the news that there's a lot of talk about foreign bank accounts and foreign accounts in general. We here have handled a lot of voluntary disclosures in connection with individuals that had foreign bank accounts. And typically what happens is the tax returns used to be done in a little different way, meaning there used to be no question, or there was a question on your tax return that said, do you have a foreign bank account? And everybody that had one would answer that as no. But now what's happened is with the communication that's going on between the U.S. government and a lot of foreign governments, the access to these foreign accounts are well known now. So if you're not going to come forward voluntarily, the IRS will come to you and ask about all those foreign accounts that you have. So that's something to keep your eye on, because there are programs out there to help you become compliant. But the good old days of being able to hide money offshore and not report it to the IRS are gone. And on top of that, you could be referred over again to criminal in connection with those situations where if you don't report it and they find out about it, well, guess what? They're not going to be very happy about that, and especially depending if there's a large sum involved. So we've had situations where we've had school teachers from Israel that are here in the U.S. that had just an account over there that, guess what? They had a foreign bank account, didn't report it, so they had to go through the process of getting that voluntary disclosure. There's other cases like that all over the place where a lot of people that have these foreign bank accounts really weren't trying to hide money offshore. It's just what happened was when the IRS announced these programs, they were going after the individuals that were purposely trying to evade taxes, and what happened is it pulled in everybody that has a foreign bank account. So you really need to report those foreign bank accounts. The other thing that I'm seeing too more and more, and this will lead to the criminal discussion as well, is Probably 10, 15 years ago, when I really started doing controversy work in general, you could essentially, well, let me step back. I have not seen a tax return for a closely held business that does not run, the owners do not run some form of personal expenses through the company. It could be small, it could be large. It could be a situation where they run them through the company but don't deduct them for some reason or another, or they are trying to deduct them. Previously, what would happen is the IRS would find these things, they would assess, and then you hit you with penalties, and there would be no discussion about possible referral to criminal. The times have changed, and I see that this is, while it might not be a program that the IRS has announced, it's a bigger focus for the IRS regarding individuals that are running through personal expenses through their returns. And the dollar amounts don't have to be large in order for it to be referred to criminal. So that's another area that when we get involved with an audit, we will do a deep dive into the tax return and the financials and find out what actually is going on, and then make sure that we have an understanding of where we need to go when we're handling that audit.
Let me ask you, Todd, with regards to these referrals from the civil side, if we just focus it on the personal expenses through the business, is that one way that the criminal side, and we'll talk more exactly what the criminal side is, but is that one way that your folks find cases?
Yeah, absolutely. The referrals, again, from the revenue agents that are out there doing the audits, there's a program. They are strongly encouraged if they find badges of fraud in the case to refer it over to the criminal side for evaluation. It doesn't mean just because they refer a case over that it will rise to the level of a criminal, full-fledged criminal investigation, but we are asked to kind of work in tandem with our civil side to kind of look at cases on a whole. But there's a variety of other sources. We've got, just in Ohio, we've got 70 to 80 agents that are working cases. It's on each agent to go out there and look at whatever they want to look at. Some people will read the newspaper and look for cases. I'll say that ex-employees, current employees sometimes come in with information about wrongdoing. Ex-husbands, ex-wives, it's always a pretty good source. You got to kind of vet them very well why they're bringing this information to you. But there's a variety of sources. I wouldn't just assume that it's just only, just because you're getting an audit, it means it's coming to a criminal case. There could be other ramifications that are out there. So somebody, assumes that, hey, just because I'm under audit and it's all going to be cleared up, that might not necessarily be the case, because we might find out the information from other sources as well.
Now, in the cases that you and I had worked together for many years, we also received them from other law enforcement agencies as well. I mean, if a company or an individual is being looked at by the Department of Labor, not necessarily just the FBI, but just basically an administrative situation. Have you seen a lot of those lately where you'll get a call?
Absolutely. I mean, our resources, quite honestly, the IRS has been going down year over year. I think we're down to about 2,300 special agents as it is. We used to be about 100,000 employees in general at the agency, but we're all down personnel-wise. So there's always that kind of force multiplier where you're reaching out to your law enforcement partners to look for cases. And we're kind of known as the financial investigators. So if it's FBI, Secret Service, whoever they're out, they might be looking at a case for some other reason. They might call up the IRS and say, hey, we've got this thing going on here. Do you mind taking a look at it? There might be another angle to it. And we bring that expertise as it relates to tax, money laundering, Basic Secrecy Act type violations. So there's always multiple sets of eyes looking at things in the area.
So can I jump in for a second? That raises an interesting point. It might sound counterintuitive, but we've had situations where we've represented individuals that may have embezzled money from companies. One of the things to think about is if you ever run into that situation, make sure that individual is picking up that money on their tax returns. You might say, well, why would they do that? Well, guess what? You don't want to have bigger problems with the IRS. You already have embezzled money, and if you're guilty of that, it's a situation where if you report it on your tax return, at least you're not going to have the IRS after you as well. So that's just something that I know it doesn't happen all the time, but as Todd mentioned earlier, he looks at the newspaper. Or not Todd specifically, but other agents might be looking in the newspaper. They see an article about someone embezzling money. Well, guess what? What's the logical conclusion? Did they pick it up in income? If the answer is no, well, guess what? Now you got bigger issues with the IRS, not just in connection with doing time for violating the law.
I want to turn to Perry, if I may. Now, Perry, for everyone here, he's left the IRS. He was an agent. He was also a civil. He started as a collections officer.
Yes.
And Perry has the distinction as being the only IRS agent in the country ever to be deputized as an assistant U.S. attorney here in Cleveland for a while, because he did go to law school while he was an agent. So for what that means is, when we were prosecutors, we would get other agencies to loan us lawyers, just because the workload was so strong. So he is the only person to ever have done that with the IRS. So why don't you tell us, to go back to the civil side,
Sure.
with your work with collections, because it's fair to say that that's the most, it's more likely that a person is going to have dealings with the collections side more than Todd's group, right?
I was a revenue officer for 8 years, and basically we get cases in a variety of ways, but it's all people that owe taxes through different ways. Either they were audited or they filed tax returns knowing that they were that they owed the taxes. So after receiving approximately 4 letters and several phone calls, it would come to the collection, the field office, me. And I would go, whether it's a business, individual, people from all walks of life, knock on the door and say, according to our records, you owe X thousands of dollars. Can you full pay today? Usually the answer was no, I can't full pay today, except for one time. So it was good I asked that one time. But after that, it's negotiation of how can you pay. We would take a financial statements, several if it involves businesses, just one if it's individual income tax, and try to work out a plan on how to pay the taxes, how the individual can pay the taxes. I think it's important. I think, as mentioned earlier, you can't ignore the phone calls. You can't ignore we would leave a card at the door, and you can't ignore the demands of the revenue officer. You have to keep good records as well for tax purposes. But at this point, once it gets in the hands of a revenue officer, bad things can happen to the client. If they ignore us, then IRS has the authority to seize bank accounts, to seize cars. One particular case, a gentleman owned a bunch of billboards around the city.
And this was in Cleveland?
In Cleveland,
Mm-hmm.
in Cleveland. He owned billboards, and it wasn't working out between he and I. I was giving him demands as far as, you need to make certain payments. You need to pay your current taxes on time. You need to provide me certain documentation, all written down with a deadline, and I advised him of the consequences if he didn't. Well, he didn't comply, and what I did in this case was I drove around. It must have taken me a day and a half. Drove around the city. I knew where all his billboards were, and I wrote down every company that advertised on his billboards, and I sent that company a levy saying, "Don't pay him, pay IRS." Unfortunately, that's the level we got to because he ignored our demands. Now, I understand that this is going to hurt his business because a lot of these people aren't going to advertise with him again. But it's important that that everybody pays their taxes. I pay my taxes, and that was the mantra. Other situations, there were bars, restaurants, same deal. We advised them of what our demands were in terms of providing us records, so we can come to a conclusion of the case. Be current on your current taxes, filing and paying on time the current taxes, making the required payments. And I think there were a bunch of restaurants and bars, and if they didn't comply, we'd show up at the bar restaurant and with a cash register seizure, saying, we want all the cash. You haven't done what we've told you to do, asked you to do. And
Yeah, okay.
if you don't, we're seizing the contents of this cash register, and because it was in a private area, we would need their consent, and we tell them if you don't sign this consent, that we would seize the entire restaurant. So my point is, and I can go on and on with the stories of seizing and levying on wages, et cetera, but there's got to be a dialogue, and there's got to be communication and payments and filing on time. The worst thing you could do, I think, is ignore a revenue officer.
I think it's important to note that, because you have to remember, at this stage, once a revenue officer gets involved, there's already been an assessment. It's not like you're at audit where you're trying to talk, but there is a reason for communicating with the revenue officer, and that's because they don't do things 9 times out of 10 they do it right, but there's those occasions when a mistake is made. And so you basically have to make sure that you're handling it properly, whether it's a client of ours or if you're in this situation with the IRS. And what I mean by that is, we had a situation a couple of years ago where we went through the audit, went through appeal, client got assessed, and then all of a sudden we had a very aggressive revenue officer. Even though we were communicating all the time with them, the individual decided to do something that they shouldn't have done, which was they disclosed our client's social security number when they filed a lien. And obviously that caused a whole bunch of problems for our client. So we had to nicely convince the IRS that they made a mistake. And usually in these situations you don't have any leverage, but this was a way for us to create leverage. And it ended up getting us into a position where we could move forward with an offer in compromise, which we'll talk about later.
Richard, can I add something there?
Sure.
I talked about some scary stories about IRS collection, but I also want to, as a result of ignoring the IRS, but I want to flip the coin there a little bit and also mention that in my experience, I would advise the taxpayer not to be too ambitious with the payment plan. And what happens is the IRS would show up as a revenue officer saying we need to make the payment, and all the good citizens of the country say, you know what, IRS is my highest priority. I want to pay this off. I want to be a good citizen. I want to pay. I want you off my radar. And then unfortunately they would make promises that they can't keep. And with all good intentions, they would make promises they can't keep and end up looking even worse. Because it goes into, there's a payment agreement, it goes into payment agreement status, and then it's defaulted. And then the next revenue officer gets the case, looks at the history, and says, oh gosh, this guy, we gave him a payment agreement, he defaulted. Why should we give him another payment agreement? Let's just start seizing some assets. So I might be a good time for some advice from counsel.
Yeah, because I want to follow up with that. In your experience, and I'm going to ask Todd too, from a criminal standpoint, and you having done both civil and criminal, as an attorney, we want to be with our client, but does it, from the IRS standpoint, initially as you as the revenue officer or as a special agent on a matter, help or not help if a taxpayer has an attorney or an accountant with them?
In my experience, it always helps, and here's why. A couple reasons. Number one, the taxpayer, they know their business. They know, their widget business. They know their restaurant. They know, how to make their widget. The suppliers, the most important ingredient for their food, et cetera. But they may be a lot weaker with their finances, and not have their not have those in order. That's why they owe taxes, right? The other thing where it's helpful is with representation, it kind of takes the emotion out of it. And here's another set of eyes to look at it and say, well, wait a second, you want to make an agreement to pay $2,000 a month? What about your, there's tuition, your mortgage, this is awful tight, and in your business it's cyclical, so you're okay in June, July, and August, but what happens when it's September and you're in the low end of your business cycle. So for those two reasons, I think it's also always helpful to have counsel in these situations.
And here's a practical advice little situation that I've run into a lot. Usually when we get a client that comes to us and says, I've received this audit letter, what should I do? My first recommendation to them is they don't talk to the revenue agent. And the reason why is because, as Perry mentioned, the business owner is focused on the business, doesn't necessarily always know the financials, doesn't always understand how the books and records work. And so therefore, when they sit down with the revenue agent, whatever they say is going to go on the record. And what I mean by that is, we may get involved after the fact, but in the examination report that is written up by the revenue agent, you're going to bet your bottom dollar that there's going to be a reference in there to what that business owner said to the revenue agent that's going to be in that examination report, that even though you've proved that that's not the facts, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be in that examination report to prove the point that the IRS is trying to make in connection with the assessment. Mm-hmm. So,
in the same criminally, though, if we make a contact as a special agent, that contact is recorded. I mean, via memo. Mm-hmm. So any statements that are made, be it truth or not truth, they're on the record. So whether they decide to retain counsel or an accountant or whoever, that personally doesn't bother me. I mean, whether you want it or not. But I do try to remind people that we expect the truth. If you decide to talk, that's fine, but it needs to be the truth. Because if it's not, there's also charges that can be brought against people for lying to federal officers. Mm-hmm. It's not used very often, but it is
not
there.
By the IRS anyway. By another agency often. Right. Would it be fair to say, and the civil as much as the criminal, right or wrong, you would prefer to have someone, if you're speaking to them, with no counsel from a government standpoint, because you usually have more control over the conversation, and most people are not accustomed to dealing with federal agents?
Some agents will have that viewpoint, mm-hmm. for sure. I look at it and say, at the end of the day, my agents, myself, we were charged with getting down to the bottom, the truth, mm-hmm. the truth. So whatever it is, whatever gets us to the truth, that's where we want to be at. Mm-hmm. Yes, you might feel like you have more control of the person to have free thoughts, but at the same token, I find that sometimes people, like we kind of talked about, they might be trying to tell you something, maybe win you over, either consciously or subconsciously, and they might not be telling you the facts as they actually happened.
Sure.
So sometimes taking that step back, we'll go out there. I mean, our agents go out there and we'll do, we knock on your door, we show up, we kind of have a lot of the answers already, mm-hmm. and we're asking you the questions to kind of verify what you're telling us is the truth. Mm-hmm. So, people need to kind of keep that in the back of their mind that it's when we do show up, we often actually know the answers to the questions already.
And standard operating practice early in the morning before people go to work, we confess that this is what we would normally do. And if I had lawyers, at least they slowed it down and better for the client, I guess, in the long run.
It varies. Search warrants definitely. I'll concede search warrants are done early in the morning, but interviews, okay. it kind of varies.
The special agent will have reviewed bank records and other records often for months before they actually make the first knock on the door. So the special agents are really well equipped with the answers.
Sure.
And this is where it's different between civil and criminal, because you don't know at the civil level, they haven't reviewed anything for the most part. They've seen the tax return, they've asked for all these documents, and they want to talk to you. And the problem is business owners don't understand tax law. Heck, there's a lot of tax attorneys that don't understand tax law, but that's a whole other story. So you've got to understand how those get answered and based on what the questions are being posed to that business owner. because they may have an idea of what they're supposed to say, but they really don't know the correct answer. So it's not like you're trying to coach them, it's just trying to get to the right answer based on the facts. Because again, like Todd said, all we care about is the truth. And if it's gray, we're going to argue gray. If it's black and white, okay, we'll give up on that. But at the end of the day, you got to know the facts before you can properly represent someone.
And would it be fair to say that a significant difference between a civil case, where taxes are clearly owed, and a criminal case, which is the intent to defraud, comes right down to the intent of the taxpayer?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the biggest difference. No one gets prosecuted for making mistakes. It's the intent to evade the taxes, to not pay, to get away with it. It's the intent. Badges of intent, keeping a double set of books and records, hiding something, lying to the IRS. What else you have?
Lying to banks. Often we'll see people that file, they want to pay the least amount of tax, so they'll file a tax return saying I'm only making this amount of dollars, but they want to get a loan on something, and they have to show a real tax return. Right there, you've already got a charge for a possible bank fraud, as well as a tax fraud, so you kind of choose your poison.
Well, that's
where you're lying to the bank or you're lying to the IRS, and it's kind of...
I can think of a particular case where we got the bank record showing that the loan, I make this much money, and then the application to the Visa card where they make that much money, and the choice to the person sitting across the table from us, we said, well, what's your choice? Tax fraud or bank fraud? And he was in a very difficult situation. He chose bank fraud, but I mean, because he fears, properly so, the IRS. I would have done the same thing.
But yes, I mean, to piggyback on Perry, that willfulness, the intent really drives what the agents from a criminal side are looking at. They don't want to, people do make mistakes, accountants make mistakes, and we try to vet that out as early as we can, if that is the case. And we're not going to pursue cases where there was mistakes made. But if we can show that there was criminal willfulness on the taxpayer's part to evade a tax, defeat the tax, not pay tax, those will rise to the criminal levels and be pursued by the criminal division.
And I want to talk about the criminal, but before we get into that group, Perry, you as a revenue officer, someone owes taxes. They do. They find in a situation, they come to Dave. Dave says, "Yo, the taxes, you have to pay it." What kind of authority did you or the people right now, who we as taxpayers deal with on a one-to-one, what kind of authority do you have if we owe $50,000 in taxes to bring it down? Because I can only pay $200. What can you do for me?
Well, as far as the tax due and owing, if there's a legitimate reason to, if there was a mistake made at the audit or a mistake made in return, we can go to appeals and have it reduced. But in terms of, if the tax is what it is, and the person cannot pay the tax now or in the foreseeable future, including a disposition of assets, then we have the authority of entering into what's called an offer and compromise program. And it's basically settling for less than the total tax, penalties, and interest. And there's quite a calculation involved. You said $50,000, right? Yeah. Okay, the tax, penalties, and interest are $50,000. And for example, I say, I'm the taxpayer, I say I can't pay anything, and here's my finances, and here's my assets, they add up to zero. I can barely make ends meet month to month, and with my age and my health in the foreseeable future, because there's a 10-year statute of limitations for the IRS to collect. So this all goes into the calculation. But I have my uncle, Todd, who is going to agree to pay the IRS $10,000 and will wipe the slate clean. Now, it's an exhaustive. The IRS is going to give up money, so the IRS is going to invest some time and energy into looking into if this is a good deal for the IRS or not. And I think what I described to you is a pretty good deal. I would, taking $10,000 versus just leaving this person in the what they call the queue to being interviewed every 4 years is a waste of money. So let's take the money now. That's a nice program.
Yeah, and the process is very complicated too, so it's not something that I've seen a taxpayer to be able to do on their own. So they are going to need the help of their accountant or attorney to get it through, because it's very cumbersome.
Very, very, and traps for the unwary. It's important.
Yeah, because contrary to what I've heard people say, when you owe the IRS money, interest is always accumulating. Always accumulating.
Yes.
And as are penalties. And if you're lucky, you can get the penalties abated.
Sometimes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But if you're making some money, I mean, an offer in compromise is not guaranteed for all taxpayers, right?
No, it's not. Again, it's getting the IRS crystal ball and saying, okay, we got this guy, and he wants to settle, but wait a second, maybe he or she is only 32 years old. Maybe there's some potential money to be made out there. Maybe there's an inheritance they might receive. So it's I think it's a little bit of guesswork. I think if you get 4 different agents, you might get 4 different opinions on it. Maybe 3 different opinions, but I think it's a worthy program. We get a lot of money that we otherwise wouldn't see, and taxpayers get out of debtor prison, which is great for them.
Yeah.
They get a chance to move on without having the IRS call it every 3 years or 3 months or whatever.
Because you owe the IRS even if you go into bankruptcy, right?
That's correct.
That's right.
It's all about painting a picture. You got to tell a story, because a lot of taxpayers, again, I think we mentioned it earlier, they're very emotional. Okay, take the emotion out of it and paint the picture. What is your financial situation? I mean, if you're broke and that's the reason why, that you've got some phantom income that's come about and you can't pay the tax on it, tell a story, and that way you can help with the offer in compromise.
Tell the true story, though, because there's also cases that we get referred over where people just try to get cute, put assets in other people's names, or not be fully forthright even with their counsel. And in those cases, when we find out about it, those are prime examples where the IRS says, look, we're going to go after these people for this false offer and compromise and call it evasion of payment case. If you had the ability to pay and you're trying to use this program that the IRS has given for the benefit of the taxpayer to resolve issues, and you're going to use that as a mechanism to skirt your obligations, then we're going to go after you.
Sure.
I had a case that we prosecuted the first time, and it was a traditional IRS case. It was a civil audit, and the revenue agent looked into the case and saw badges of fraud, referred it to us, and became a criminal case. And we prosecuted the criminal case. At the end of the day, I think he owed $50,000, but penalty and interest, it accrued to quite a bit. And we're at I'll never forget, we're at the at sentencing, and he's in front of the judge saying, I'm sorry for having, and he points to the prosecution table, I'm sorry to make these IRS guys work so hard on little old me. I'll be clean from here, you'll never see me again. Well, what we found out was through all these dealings with us in the background, he was setting himself up. He wasn't doing an offer and compromise, but I saw a little parallel here for me to tell a good story. And what he did was he started hiding all his assets in nominees and his kids' names, and he even got a sham divorce, putting the assets in her name. And you should read the divorce decree. It was like, what a horrible guy he was, and that's why she should get all the assets. Well, through investigative efforts, we were able to prove that, and of course he gets out of prison, and he's living with her. That was kind of a little giveaway, but it was a great case involving someone trying to play with the system and keep. That's what a lot of times you'll hear. They'll do the time, but they want to keep the assets. Well, and he bragged about that on at one point to one of our informants, saying, you know, look, they took my time, but they didn't get my assets. But
what did you do after that?
We seized his assets.
And that raises another issue about the personalities of people who we would look at, or you guys can continue to look at and who come to me for help. But I mean, what do you see about certain types of personalities that give you the motivation to keep working cases, as opposed to the little old me guy? I mean.
Well, I mean, this guy was the guy the story I told you about. I think it was the guy was a little arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to beat the system, and I think a case like that goes into the news, people read about it and says, holy crap, I'm not going to be that guy, and it gives us good deterrence in terms of, you know, everybody saying, mm-hmm. I'm going to pay my taxes and I'm going to stay out of the limelight. I'll put it that way.
I think a common theme that I've seen, though, is people start small.
Mm-hmm.
They get away with something relatively small, maybe push through a deduction here or there, nobody notices. They talk to their buddy who says, hey, I did twice that amount, and nobody's ever audited me on that. And sometimes it snowballs,
sure.
And it snowballs, and it snowballs, and you get yourself at the end of this thing, you look at it, okay, well, in the totality, you actually did a lot. You know, I can think of in a public corruption realm, we work a lot of public corruption cases. You know, they'll talk about, oh, I took a gift. It started out as a gift. You know, a lunch or a dinner, then it turned into Cavs tickets, then it turned into this, then it turned into the trip, then it turned into, you know, and nobody ever put the brakes on it. They ever took that kind of, you know, slow it down and take a look at what the other view might be. Mm-hmm. And then we see it at the very end when we look at it and say, well, geez, you traveled the world, you did all this stuff, and you did it either through your company's dime or on the back of some other, you know, bribe or whatever you want to call it, and that's what gives it, you know, again, we kind of talk about our goal is to make sure everybody's paying their fair share. So it's a lot easier for us to sell a jury and say, hey, you paid your fair share, you paid your fair share, but this guy over here was right on the backs either via bribes or, you know, not paying his taxes and got to experience all this great stuff. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you like to have experienced that too?
Yeah.
I had a guy in the old Flats Entertainment. You know, when we prosecuted him or them, you know, he would say, well, gosh, you know, everybody. I think it was a payroll tax. I think it was a payroll tax case. And as far as income tax as well. And he goes, well, you know, everybody up and down the street does this. You know, we can't survive, we can't stay in business.
And then you stayed busy for the next 6 years, right?
well, yeah, we can use them to turn to stay fully employed, mm-hmm. and go on to the next case. But you know, it's not the case because you look at their assets, and that's another thing for jury appeal is showing what they've accumulated, the disposition of assets. What, you know, you evaded your income taxes. What'd you do with it? Well, then you put on the screen the big house in Cleveland, the big vacation homes in South Carolina and Florida, and then the number of trips around the world. And really, you needed to do this to stay in business because everybody else is doing it? No, you needed to mm-hmm. Keep the assets.
Yeah. No, I mean, for most people here, hopefully, they never have to deal with you guys, other than maybe seeing you in the elevator. But what is it with the criminal investigative unit of the IRS? Maybe you can give just an overview of who you are and how you fit in with those of us who basically just fill out tax returns. And we hear a lot about you now on, not you, but people in Cincinnati and elsewhere with the IRS in the news. You're not like them, are you?
I'll defer to Perry.
Well,
former employee.
As far as you know, I'll address portions of that question. We're in the criminal investigation. We're a very, very small part of IRS. You know, a large part of IRS is the civil auditing section, whether it's income taxes, corporations, estates and trusts. Huge arm of the IRS to determine if people are you know, paying their fair share. And I think we have 100,000 employees.
Yeah, the rough estimate is 100,000 IRS-wide, about 2,300
Yeah, 2,300 special agents. So we're a very, very small part of IRS. I think we're a big part of the federal prosecution department in terms of financial crimes, looking into, you know, wherever the financial crime leads us, whether it's a traditional restaurant, a personal injury attorney, income tax evasion being conducted, or money laundering being conducted through the dark web. We're small, but we're strong. I retired, so I can't say we anymore. But IRS CI is strong, and they're small, but they're everywhere. Wherever criminal financial crime is being conducted, IRS special agent will have to learn about that type of industry, that type of scheme, and now for example the deep dark web, with maybe you've heard of the Silk Road, that investigation involving money laundering and drug trafficking.
Sure. Well, I've heard of it. But maybe I have a question from someone in the audience here, and I'm not sure if it's public information or not, but how many offer and compromises are you aware of are approved with the agency?
A percentage of offer
and compromises.
I don't have any idea. I guess once the there are different stages. I used to triage the offer and compromise, meaning I'd get a stack of this back when we got paper. I used to get a stack of like this of offer and compromises for Cuyahoga County and read through them, and maybe one or two I'd elevate. But once a package is submitted above the revenue officer, that is, the revenue officer reads it and determines it's worthy to submit to the supervisor, I'd say a good percentage. I would guess. I'm not sure, but I guess about 80%. Once the revenue officer approves it, I think a revenue officers are given a lot of authority, and they know a lot because they live this stuff every day. I think a good portion will be accepted.
Okay. You have a question for Todd, and it's not about your tie. It's you explain that individuals will not be criminally charged for tax evasion based on a mistake. How do you determine whether an incorrect tax return is a result of an honest mistake or fraud? And specifically, what investigative techniques do you use, such as interviews or subpoenas? And how can a good criminal defense attorney convince you there has been no fraud? Well, you know how I convince you all the time that there's never any fraud by my clients.
The 4-point question. Okay, so again, there's a variety of factors. Not one. I don't think one thing in of itself is going to set it apart. If it, there's oftentimes I've had cases where it might rest on a technical issue. I can think back to the case where we looked at a guy who was claiming to be a real estate professional, and it was a very kind of, I'd call it a civil technical tax issue. But when you looked at the totality of what he was doing, he was filing what I kind of alluded to about the filing with the bank,
sure, showing
different tax returns, claiming claiming that his income was way higher, was probably more realistic to what the bank what he was putting on the tax return. He was doing state sales tax schemes where he was trying to avoid paying the state sales tax, showing that he had paid the sales tax when in fact he really just redeposited the check. So I think when we look at honest mistakes versus whatever, if it's just on the surface there's a mistake on the tax return and it could reasonably be believed that it was a mistake, we kind of look for other factors that are outside of it that show maybe that the mindset of the person. Are they really, is it just a one-time thing, or is it part of a larger pattern of fraud along the way? I think if somebody just had a wrong tax return and we think it might be fraudulent, they say it's not, absent other factors on the outside, that case probably isn't going to go forward because, again, we have to go in front of a jury of people who have no idea about tax law, for the most part, and convince them this person willfully, beyond a reasonable doubt, very high standard, committed this crime against the U.S. government. That's a very high burden. We take that very, to heart personally in the agency and say, look, we got to convince that jury. So if this case is marginal, it needs to go by the wayside because it's not, and not to say that it wasn't, a crime wasn't committed per se, but you only need to really kind of pick those best cases.
And as far as what an attorney could do to help convince you, from our standpoint, it's usually to give you information that you don't have.
Absolutely.
Many times.
If there's, whatever's out there, whatever, whatever can help your client, but on the same token, it needs to be stuff that's verifiable. I mean, just to make a claim saying that my guy didn't do it, he's the greatest person ever, that's not going to let the agent go away. If you're going to say, well, he ran through these personal expenses, but these were actually business expenses, and here's the reasons why, here's the people that were involved with it that can attest to that, that's fine, and give us that information, who we can talk to, but we're going to go out there and verify it. So whatever is given to that agent, their job is not just to take it on the surface, but both to the detriment and to the credit of the client. If it's going to exonerate the client too, that's fine. That's what we want our people to do, to go out there and find the truth. But if the information is given to us, they're going to track it down. So yeah, we'll subpoena records. We're going to interview people, search warrants, consensual monitorings can happen. There's a variety of investigative techniques that are used to kind of make sure that we're on the right path when it comes to a case.
Okay. I think that
I think that's right.
was all of them. We have one here. Many years ago, there was a front page article in the Plain Dealer, which means it must be true, about a couple who did not pay their taxes, but instead donated money to a charity as a protest to U.S. military activities. Would they be pursued criminally by the IRS in this case? And if you know, were they?
I'm not familiar with this case, and I think Todd would agree that we'd need a lot more facts to make a determination as to whether we'd go forward. Sounds strange, but I think we need a lot more facts.
Right, and there is a lot of review in-house in criminal investigation, and even in the civil side of the IRS. There's in-house counsel. There's a lot of levels of review. I wouldn't want people to take the impression away that just because if I got a rogue agent who feels like he's going to really...
Tell them what process it takes. I mean, just in a general way.
If it was just like what we'd call a legal source tax case, so the business owner decided to deduct a lot of deductions and it got referred to criminal investigation. We investigate it. We decide, yes, there's criminal prosecution warranted. That agent's going to go out there and write a special agent's report. He's going to submit it to the supervisor. The supervisor's going to review the report and say, I think this looks good. It goes to an in-house, another special agent whose only job is to review the report to make sure we think this is okay. At that point, it goes to the special agent in charge of the field office, who kind of gives it the blessing. It goes then to our in-house counsel, criminal tax counsel. So their whole job is just a legal review to make sure that the case in there passes muster from a legal standpoint. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 people in-house that have reviewed the case.
So that's about a week and a half?
Ideally, yeah. Several months that has gone by. Then the case would go to, if it's a tax case, it would go to the department judge's tax division.
And that's in Washington it goes.
In Washington, D.C. So attorneys there would then review the case. And these are all out. I mean, these are all independent people who haven't looked at this case before. They don't have anything vested in the case. They're going to take a look at it. They're going to read the agent's report. They'll even offer a conference if they want to the counsel to come in and present their side if they feel that it's not accurately reflected. And then the case would then, if they agree that a prosecution is warranted, then that case gets assigned to the local United States Attorney's Office where venue would lie. And then they still have a choice whether they want to pursue a case or not. So it's a very exhaustive review process. We have the highest conviction rate of any agency out there, I think in the 90th percentile. And that's because the bad cases honestly usually get weeded out well before they get to the United States Attorney's Office.
Yeah, and so these cases could be coming to my old office 4 or 5 years after you open up a case, right?
They could, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Todd and Perry, I do have one question though, because I think there's a misconception from taxpayers that say, I've gone through a civil audit, the audit's done, now I'm home clear, I'm free, nothing will happen, criminal, nothing could happen. Is that always the case or no?
No. For the example I gave earlier was a civil case along the same route, and at a certain point, the revenue agent saw some, like I said, badges of fraud, and turned it over to IRS, and it takes time for IRS CI to review it to make a determination if we want to accept it. And this could happen at any time. Any time the revenue agent feels that he or she sees badges of fraud and wants to refer it to the criminal investigation.
Or they might not have known about the full breadth of the activity. An audit might cover certain tax years and certain specific items. We might get information from somebody else or another source or what might and say, hey, well, while you might have looked at this, you didn't talk about this entity, or all this, the larger picture. in which case we can go in at any time
Yeah.
from criminal investigation standpoint and kind of tell civil, whether it's done or not, you're on hold, we're taking over and moving forward.
And without getting too complicated about it, because we only have a few minutes left, you on the criminal side have access to grand jury information if there's an ongoing criminal investigation by another agency as well, correct? Which you cannot, by law, share with the civil folks.
Correct.
So you may have some information that they don't.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have, I think we have time for one more question, and this would be more or less from your non-official perspective. Do you think that there will ever be tax simplification passed? The person says, I don't think by simplifying tax law, or do you think that by simplifying tax law, that fraud would be diminished in your experiences?
No, because our job is to prove willfulness, and willfulness comes from greed. I think there's you know, I think you know, any tax case, any financial crime case comes as a result of greed, and simplifying the tax case, the tax system won't stem greed. So,
Human
no.
nature?
Yeah. Correct.
Well, we do have time. Let me just ask you this. It's a topic that we deal with in great detail here at McDonald Hopkins. ID theft, or the theft of any kind of information. I know that the two of you, we had worked cases together on this. What are your thoughts on that? And again, just to share with the audience here, of where we are with it, what to look out for, or the status of things.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's important that as soon as you can, file your tax return, because the longer, and you know, your clients as well, the longer you wait, the more time the ID thieves will have to file a return in your name, your social security number, your kids, etc.
And do you see that often?
Yeah. It's in IRS, you'll see lines out the door at their taxpayer service center, and the majority of them are ID theft victims. You know, most of the time it used to be people coming to have IRS prepare their tax return or get a form here or there, but the lines are out the door because their IDs were stolen, and they need an affidavit and these other forms.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see, Todd? I mean, with regards to our personal information out there?
I just say, tell everybody, assume all your information's out there. I mean, at the end of the day, your social, date of birth, everything's out there. It's just a matter of time until somebody either gets the information and wants to try to act on it. We've seen the schemes get much more sophisticated. It used to be really kind of low-level stuff. They've kind of hacked IRS systems. They're really trying to go out there now and try to mimic returns to make it look like high net worth people, because the idea being IRS does metrics like we talked about, looking for outliers. If you are somebody who could feasibly get a $50,000 refund, and an ID thief has your information and files a return that could look like your return and requests a $50,000 refund, the likelihood of that actually going out is increased. So we just say, everybody, assume your information is out there and try to be on top of it. Like I said, filing early always helps, but just staying on top of your finances as well. I mean, and if you do become a victim, be proactive with it. You know, filing ID theft affidavit with the IRS, through the FTC. They have a nice ID theft toolkit to go through there with that. And then to piggyback on the ID theft is, you know, these phone call scams that are going out there. You know, whether everybody calls up, says it's the IRS or the police department, we're coming to arrest you. I mean, please do not. I mean, you just hang up. Do not respond to those. I mean, the IRS, in a collection case, might actually call you and say, hey, you owe money. Yeah. But that's going to be kind of the end of it. You're going to say, see the letter that we sent you. Short of that, the rest of us, we're not calling up people. If we did call you up, it'd be, hey, we need to meet with you. We'll send you a letter. We'll do whatever we need to do. But it's not going to be calling people up and saying, you know, unannounced that you owe the IRS money, that you need to go buy a green dot or prepaid card of some sort and then and load it up. There's some very sophisticated people. I'm not to say that they fell for it, but these people are good. They're very convincing. The reason why it's, you know, continuing is that people are falling victim to it. So it's not.
What do they do with the phone? With the phone, they make it look. They
spoof the number to make it look like, you can spoof a number to say it's coming from wherever you want. So I can make it look and say IRS Cleveland. I can say Cleveland Police Department. I can spoof the number, and you might look at it and look it up in Google and say, yeah, that's actually the number for whatever police department. This actually might be legitimate,
But I think a good way to work around that. Well, first of all, IRS is never going to say, you know, pay by end of today. We're going to arrest you. I think Todd. hit on that. But you know, if you're ever concerned about the legitimacy of the call, ask for their phone number to call them back. Ask for their ID number, because every IRS revenue officer, revenue agent is required to have an ID number. And I think in my experience, my last year with IRS, you know, people have been pretty diligent about getting calls from legitimate IRS agents, but checking on them. And there's nothing wrong with checking, calling the IRS and say, hey, calling the IRS number that you see in, I was going to say phone book, but who has a phone book anymore? And calling and say, is Todd Weitzel really an IRS agent? I got a call from this guy. You know, verify it. Verify it.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think that's our time here. We promised we'd conclude by 1. I think we're probably just 1 minute behind. If you all have additional questions here in Cleveland, we'll be happy to talk with you after the program. And for those of you viewing by our webcast, you can still submit your questions using the chat feature on our website. Our team continues to follow the latest developments regarding IRS audits and many other legal and business issues. You can tune into our website, mcdonaldhopkins.com, for a replay of today's event as well as many others. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and perspectives about the subject discussed here today. We will email a survey requesting feedback, and we encourage you to respond. Personally, I want to thank Dave for taking his time out today, Todd for coming over, and Perry for coming up from North Carolina just to attend this in person. And thank you for joining us all. Thanks.